Festival. What a lineup I'm following. I feel much like Hannah did. She handled some of the things that I didn't have time to describe, so that's kind of awesome. I can't really think of a better place to get into the topic of why we can't talk about something, specifically sex, than a festival that's designed to challenge assumptions about our puritanically founded culture. Also with ingredients science of making shit up. This is really handy follow. I definitely meant the we in the title, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I promise not to ask anything embarrassing. Much like sex, this could be fun by myself, but it's more fun if you're participating. I'm excited to see a pretty awesome age range in the group, so I promise I won't be too student-focused, but it also makes it easy not to assume anybody's experience or comfort level, so that's pretty great. If I use a word or phrase you need me to go into more, just wave at me or shout at me. I'm going to be doing that at you, so it's only fair. So this is me. That monstrosity that I call last name, she did a great job on. But it explains why I broadcast and write under the nickname Katie Speak. It's just easier than making you spell or remember the other one. My good friend Hal Sparks is the first person to put me on air, and he gave me the nickname. It used to bother me, like a lot of nicknames, but it's kind of grown on me because it's stuck. So before we start, I encourage people to live tweet. They've been kind enough to give us a hashtag. I won't be offended if you appear to have your nose in your phone. I'm going to be doing it myself. I'm a 10 out of 10 in severity on the ADHD scale, which you've probably already figured out. So I'm just going to assume you're multitasking out there. A little bit about why this is one of the topics that I write and speak about. I don't do very well when people tell me or try to teach me that I shouldn't think or feel something, particularly if the reason for that is that's because that's how it is, or how it's always been, or any other puritanical, patriarchal trope that really does more to reinforce unequal and a rather joy-free culture. I suspect others in this room have a similar tendency. But beyond that, my life experience and personality have pretty much conspired to create someone who can unapologetically talk about any topic, stigmatized topics, abortion, mental health, poverty. Poverty doesn't sound stigmatized. I encourage people not to read the comments on my Rolling Stone piece about Republicans and food stamps that I wrote while I was on food stamps. If you have any faith in humanity left, it will be gone by the time you get to the bottom of those 400. But I've discovered since admitting in writing that sex is like the only topic I used to have trouble talking about, that I am definitely not the only one. I've heard from erotica writers, sex educators, sex workers, and other folks who are polyamorous like myself, and other assorted non-monogamists, people you would assume have just like this topic handled from beginning to end, experience-wise and conversationally. Turns out, no. Talking about this topic for real, and I don't mean that like bro bragging that we're used to, that you're all, I see some head shakes, it's awesome. You're expected to engage in it, right? Like this isn't, it's not, it's compulsory, and it's been created by someone who wasn't you. You didn't get asked if you wanted to participate in this either. I mean like really talking about it. In fact, this was a topic of conversation last month in another event with the atheist, humanist, and agnostic groups here. And the description of their event was, why are we afraid to talk about sex? This week, it's all we'll be talking about. So sorry I wasn't here for that too. We'll be discussing communication about sex and what to talk about with a partner, reasons people cheat, and whether there's a secular reason to get married. Spoiler, it's the tax code. As a solo poly person, which means I do not live well with other people, period. So I'm not looking for that standard live-in husband / boyfriend / spouse role. Doesn't mean I don't emotionally attach and connect, or use words like love, not afraid of that word anymore. But it does mean I don't want anyone living in my house, so I don't have that standard setup, which means the tax code is going to discriminate against me for the rest of forever. So their ending question was, why is sex such a big deal? So that's where we're going to start. Since you're first on the spot. What are some of the reasons people have trouble talking about sex in general? You can just shout at me.
Because the experience itself, really talking about sex, would be like, well, I felt this when she was doing this, talking about that with your friends.
Right, it's awkward.
Yeah, pretty intimate feelings that you're sharing. So.
Right, so the intimacy is a reason, right? If you're going to talk about sex, there's this idea that if you're talking about sex with people, you have to be describing all of the sex things, and that's awkward. What else?
Just people who've been brought up, like sex is not something you talk about. It's a private thing you keep to yourself and don't talk to others about it.
Right, it's private. That could be because it's nobody's business. I'm from the Midwest. I suspect a lot of people in this room are. Grew up in Indiana, lived in Chicago until a couple of years ago. It's sort of not polite because you're imposing your bedroom on other people or asking them to tell you about theirs. What else?
Nobody actually knows anything about it.
Nobody actually knows anything about it. That's why we're here. Yay! What else?
You might reveal your inadequacies.
There you go. Right? People are afraid of having their inadequacies exposed.
Fear of judgment.
Fear of judgment.
Religious traditions that try to control sex, and particularly women?
Yes. Religion's control on the sexual conversation. And this, by the way, doesn't just affect people who grew up in religious households, right?
No.
You can't avoid it. I don't know if you've heard, but we were founded by Puritans. And the idea that they came here to seek religious freedom, sort of not quite right. They were sort of the, they were the Rick Santorums and Mike Huckabees of the day, and they didn't like being censored. Much thanks, Hannah, for your awesome speech on what actually is and is not censorship. They didn't like that they weren't able to do those things, so they came here, and they founded this country that was already founded because people were here. But so there's no way around it. We have hundreds and hundreds of years. It's become very structurally entrenched. And we learned pretty early that sex is an uncomfortable and embarrassing topic. It starts with the talk, right? Even if you're lucky enough to have comprehensive sex ed, rather than the abstinence-only, no biology version. Please pardon me, I now live in Southern California, and I thought I was still Midwestern top, but this cold weather you guys have in April has just killed me. So this talk is really uncomfortable. Even if your parents are progressive on this issue and they get to you before you Googled it all, or been through the scare version of sex ed where they just show you the slides, they still do that, right? And just like terrify you about what can happen if you have sex. It's still not the most comfortable conversation to have with your parents under the best circumstances. So we have a lot to unlearn thanks to the messages our culture sends all of us about what's normal, desirable, and allowable. That really transcends the religiosity of our homes and can be more intense for some of us. But the rating system that Hannah was talking about, it's not just like whose pleasure is censored, but it's also, we can put violence on television and in movies way easier than we can a naked body. Growing up, my mom was not worried that I would ever become violent, probably because I was a geeky, nerdy little kid who played a lot of sports. I know that's like a weird combination, but she was really worried about the ratings of things that I went to see or saw in my friends' homes before the internet. There was a lot more control for parents. If there was sex in it. I saw Dirty Dancing when I was 13. For those who don't know, it's rated PG-13. In the home of family friends of my parents, and I never got to go back to their house again. I watched it again as an adult, and I was like, this isn't even like very explicit. I mean, there's an abortion that's kind of implied, but that wasn't the thing she was worried about either. This is pretty good timing because yesterday the Pope delivered what's being hailed as per usual with a super progressive shift in Catholic doctrine. It's like 200 pages. I'll save you the time. It's basically moderately less mean to gay people without giving them any new rights, and allows divorced and married people to participate in communion, but like in 200 pages. As for any non-procreative sex, regardless of marriage status, that's like unnatural to the point of being borderline ridiculous to this Pope, right? So, because of who controls the narrative, right, not just our parents, but the Pope and figures that we're all familiar with, a whole lot of us are walking around with this vague sense of dissatisfaction, but no avenues or space to investigate alternatives or figure out what we want instead, because we're not offered it instead. It's not like discovering you don't like pizza, but you can go out for a hamburger because you've heard of a hamburger. There's too many assumptions about the way it is, and the way it is centers a very specific person, the straight cis guy. So the cisgender guy, people who are identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, who happens to be very straight on the Kinsey scale, all the way to one side. No offense to cis straight guys, I'm dating a very lovely one. But the way y'all are centered is a huge problem, and from the head shakes at the beginning, I'm sure most of you get why it's a problem. And a lot of it's because you weren't involved in creating this narrative. You were subjected to it just like we are. This week, a book titled Undone was published. Eve Kaiser gave it the succinct, snarky review it deserves under the headline, "Someone has finally written a novel about male desire." She writes, thank God we finally get to find out what that is. This is the entire length of her review. We're going to spend 30 seconds. I love the cut, the New York Magazine. It's online if you don't read it. Highly suggested. That will be my only pitch for today. John Colapinto is a true renegade in a sea of politically correct novels written by prudish women and castrated men. He had the courage to write Undone. By exploring heterosexual male lust, undiscovered territory, right? Mr. Colapinto has written the kind of novel that has gone way out of fashion in recent New York Times profile coups. He explained to the New York Times, men, at least the men I know, were still driven by all manner of unruly sexual impulse, however guiltily. So I decided to address that in as confrontational a way as possible. They said a novel about male sexual desire couldn't be written, but they didn't know John. Everything is structured around the straight cis male perspective. It's assumed that we all want what they/you want, but more than that, it's assumed for you all/them what you want. And then the rest of us line up either as pairs or deviations from that, right? Where the standard assumed is the cis straight white guy, the cis straight white middle class guy. There just aren't that many of them anymore. It's a microcosm of our entire romantic lives. For example, who here has been on a first date? Yay! Okay. What'd you talk about? Movies, music, the weather, right? So I'm 36, and for the students in the room, I'll tell you, nothing changes. First dates are the worst because everyone thinks of them as small talk, except that when it comes to what we want romantically, or relationally, or sexually, we're not talking about what we want on like the 15th or the 50th date either. It's assumed that the person sitting next to us at the coffee shop, or at the bar, or at dinner wants the same thing we want, that we all want the same thing, that we're on the mononormative, heteronormative conveyor belts, that we are going to date, and eventually we'll have a conversation about not seeing other people. And then probably we'll move in together, or we won't until we get married, depending. But then we'll get married, we all definitely want to get married. And then at some point, we'll get a dog, and then after we've had the dog, we'll have children. God forbid you have a dog when you get married, the questions about children start right away. So all of these assumptions create silence, right? That's what assumptions do. Everybody in this room knows what it's like when they bring up a topic that it is assumed we all feel the same way about. It will make you/the other person slightly uncomfortable, but like in a good way, in a way that's important for culture change. So I had a realization about 6 years ago, as I was going through a very nasty breakup with the only person I'd called a boyfriend as an adult. By adult, I mean we were both legally of age Not that we behaved at all like adults. Things looked pretty bleak. Empirical evidence told me my choices were between get back together with him or alone forever. That's just what my life experience told me, and I'm very science-based, so that was it. I had to decide which was the least bad option, which made me least miserable. Can you imagine? Not where will I be happy or most happy, but where am I least miserable? So I was staring out my window in my Chicago condo on a very gray, very cold day. Thank you, Wisconsin, for the reminder. And almost like a cartoon, a scroll unfurled over my shoulder with my life to-do list on the script at the top. And I looked at it, and I thought, who put those things on there? Because it wasn't me. It had college, that was good, glad I did that. And then underneath it said get married and have children. And I thought, well, I don't know if I want kids. Maybe I don't want kids. Maybe having children should be an affirmative choice we opt into instead of the default position. Yeah, I pictured for a second a full day of parenthood. I spent a year living with a now former friend taking care of my nieces, who were 1-year-old and 0 years old when I moved in. And I took care of them round the clock, 4.5 days a week. I love them, but I know for sure that I'm definitely not designed to be a parent. I was good at it, but I didn't like it. Being good at something and needing to do it are not the same thing at all. So then I thought, well, if I don't want kids, do I want to get married? And I looked around at my condo and the no one who was in it with me and thought, no, no I don't. And I was suddenly relieved as all the things on my list vanished. Relief. And then instantaneous panic. Well, what do I want instead? There was no hamburger. There was only pizza. So I had to figure it out. The ensuing journey has made me a happiness evangelist. That's why I'm here. It's why you're here. You're all more interested in exploring what's real and possible than doing what you are told or required or is standard / the norm. This isn't like a bullshit pursuit of happiness that says thinking happy makes you happy. If I said that, none of you would buy it anyway. I mean, really, like considering what you actually want. Thinking about what you want and what might make you happy the way you already critically think about other things. You've already pondered other social norms and other topics, right? So why should sex be any different? So as I was trying to figure it out, I spent some time on the internet, some time listening to podcasts, and I stumbled onto it. I was listening to an old episode of Sex Out Loud with Tristan Taormino, which I cannot recommend highly enough, and her guest was Reed Mahalko, who I've since gotten to interview. And he was explaining how polyamory works, and it's I sort of generically explain it as the way friends with benefits work, but like actually. We use the phrase friends with benefits. I can swear in here, right? Yeah. Awesome. We use the phrase friends with benefits to substitute for fluff buddy because we're not allowed to have those in this culture, right? So we're always one step slightly more wholesome sounding than the thing that's actually happening, right? But if friends with benefits were actually people you were friends with, who you knew and knew their friends, and you cared about them the way you care about your other friends, but you also sometimes saw them naked, that's sort of how polyamory works, right? You have some friends you're closer with than others, some you talk to more than others, works exactly the same way. And as he was describing it, I was like, that's it. Now how do I do that? Which is a whole other topic. So I had to unlearn some things as I was discovering this. Naturally, thanks to the biological impulses I've been endowed with and you have been endowed with, by the good graces of Mother Nature and her selection process, that includes sex. This is not a short process, but the good news is it is super fun. If you think of it less like a checklist and more like a really awesome road trip, where you work out the details as you go, that's kind of how it works. So if you're going on this road trip, how do you know which stops to make, right? What desires are valid is sort of the first thing to ask. So I'll ask you the flip side question. What are some desires our culture in whole or in part tells us are not allowable? And I don't mean we had good Supreme Court decisions. I mean...
Sex between family members, even as adults.
Yeah, sex between family members as adults. Maybe we'll hang on to that one just for genetic reasons.
But what if they're gay? Every time I hear that, I always hear people assuming a heterosexual label. Why does I knew a guy who was male, and him and his male cousin were doing stuff for years. And
well, that also is another talk, right? But the LGBTQ community is the obvious answer, right? We're sort of allowing y'all to get married now. We've allowed you to opt into that. But no one really wants to hear or talk about what you're doing with each other. Hannah mentioned that too, right? Like, depending on who's depicted making out or getting it on can affect a movie rating, or whether or not something has to be on Showtime instead of CBS. What about kink? We have a giggle response to fetishes, right? We're sort of like taught that. We think of people who have an extreme attraction to a shoe or something, right? But all a fetish means is that you have a pretty solid interest in something. It could be anything, right? How about non-monogamy? Done that already? Who set up the structure that said we had to find the one? Blood pressure, oh my God. How about not knowing what you desire? Someone mentioned that earlier. That's sort of an off-limits thing too. You're supposed to know what you want already. What if you don't know? Can't talk about that either. How about liking sex? Who's allowed to like sex?
Dudes.
Just the dudes, right? Just straight dudes, by the way. Right? Just the dudes. It's not just allowable for you, you're expected to, right? There's an additional like performance level on top of that, right? There's no one here who isn't familiar with the double standard, right? If me and the guy standing next to me both have the same amount of sex and enjoy it to the same degree, I'm a slut and he's, just awesome. He's just awesome. Or even just the default, even if he's not awesome, it's just like, yeah, okay, we shrug it off like it's nothing, or it's assumed. It's one of those assumptions. What if the scope of allowable desires is wider than our cultural messages tell us? That would be great, but there must be parameters. So this is where we get into consent. Boundaries are really important. They aren't the same thing as what's allowable in gender. These are person-specific. And they require us to talk about sex with each other like when we're not having it, which sounds even more terrifying to most people than talking about it while we're having it. There's a big push right now for comprehensive sex ed. Discusses desire and consent and pleasure is inclusive. And included in that is what speaker, writer, and friend of mine, Jacqueline Friedman, calls affirmative consent, which just means making sure your partner is on board with what's happening. That's it, it's just that simple. Some people have hard limits or automatic outs, things that can trigger them because of their history. Talking about sex with your partners or potential partners should include these things because we should all be out to have fun without injuring anyone. But also, on top of that, knowing your partner's boundaries can be super freeing. You don't have to be nervous that you're going to accidentally do something. You can let go and be in the moment. Which makes this a good time to mention Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Right now, April. So people with histories of trauma like me, we have the same right to sexual pleasure, should we want it, as everyone else. Which is good because there are an unfortunate lot of us. But boundaries don't just have to be about things that set off people's negative memories. They can be things that are mood killers, right? We all have mood killers. It might just be a song that grates on us, that we have to make sure isn't in our partner's playlist, because that's it, we'll have mentally checked out. It could be a perfume. It reminds us of the first person that broke our hearts, and we're just out. Sometimes it can be about an aversion to having a certain body part touched or a position that we find uncomfortable. And that one, a lot of times, is related to medical issues. So I'm from the generation before the word ergonomic. I mean, I'm sure it existed, but we weren't using it. Which means I have raging carpal tunnel, even with good physical therapy. This means that my wrists are weaker than I'd like. And I have time limits on any position that requires me to have my palm planted and hold up any part of my body weight. That's just how it is. So my partners trust me to tap out when it becomes a stress position, and I trust them not to be pushy or inconsiderate. And that trust in both directions comes from a place of open dialogue. It's rooted in that affirmative consent, where everyone agrees that all parties have to be down before anything is happening. So affirmative consent is painted by insecure, patriarchal, puritanically influenced people as something that kills the mood. Listen, anything can kill a mood if you're super perfunctory about it. So picture this. Whoa, whoa. Pardon me, miss. But would it be in the scope of things that you might permit for me to remove your pants at this juncture? Oh, just no, don't. I mean, unless you have that as a joke with your partner, right? Sex is funny and sometimes awkward, and so being able to laugh is really important, because at some point there's going to be a noise or a thing, you're going to smack someone's glasses off their face, and there's just no way around it, right? But instead of that super awkward conversation, what if you're making out with a hot girl you flirted with all night, or all semester, you pull back to catch your breath, and you whisper in her ear, or look her in the eye and say, I really wish you were wearing pants right now. Just give her a second, not just to think about it, but to feel the adrenaline and the endorphin rush, right? Of that you get when something's excited and unexpected. If she doesn't have an answer right away, or he doesn't, glance down at the zipper you desperately wish you were tapping and say, can I? An eyebrow wiggle or something, right, to lighten the mood. That is hot. It's hot to have somebody ask if they can do something first, or to tell you what they want, or ask what you want. Be prepared. Your partner may need a minute to respond. It's possible they've never had anyone ask before. I was 31, the first time anyone asked me permission to remove an article of clothing, and we'd known each other for years. And I was in his apartment at 4 a.m. after we both worked a long bar shift. We both knew why I was there. But it was intrinsic to how he is to just ask and make sure, which is why I remember it so vividly. I mean, we've all got that rom-com, Disney, don't take no for an answer, boys chase girls, girls get caught. Just do it until she says no in this culture that you can't avoid it. Take Snow White, for example. Has anyone not seen Snow White? We've all seen Snow White. Okay, awesome. She is asleep when the dude kisses her. And not just any kiss, true love's kiss. Anyone in here been in love? All right, that's a different kind of kiss. I don't know about you, but I have a real hard time giving consent when I am asleep. And he decides that this is true love. She doesn't get any say in that either. He has imposed true love and his kiss on her without her consent. Now Disney is still, I mean, we'll be okay, right? Go see Frozen if you want to feel better about Disney. I've seen it roughly 150 or 200 times, at least my nieces call it go, because they can say go before Frozen. That is the word in the character song in the middle with Elsa. But I'm going to spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil it for you. They find out in the movie that the guy she thinks she's fallen in love with, the true love at the beginning, not so great. And the thing that saves her sister at the end, true love's kiss, her sister kissing her on the cheek, right? So it's a lot of sentiments, and there's a consent moment at the end when the guy it looks like might actually be the guy she falls in love with, comes up to her, she's done something nice for him, and he says, I could just kiss you. I mean, but can I? Can we? And I always look at my 18-month-old niece and go, that's how it's supposed to be. I hope somewhere in there she's remembered, right? So even Disney is changing, and if Disney can change, we can change. So how do we begin this conversation change other than requiring everyone you sleep with to see Frozen? And hoping they catch that moment right there at the end. We begin the conversation that changes the culture by turning up the volume on our discussions about sex. So as I mentioned, I recently got to interview Reed Mahalko. We were discussing my inability to talk to even my long-term partners about what I want. I read about non-monogamy and sex positivity and consent culture, and I was bad about it, in November of this past year. And here I am. So we have to enlist more people. I promise it can be done. If I can change, and I was super religious in high school, like of my own volition, right? If I can shake that, and all the puritanical stuff that I trailed into my 30s, I promise anyone can do it. What I realized talking with Reed is that our earliest sexual experiences happen in a very specific way. Anyone want to share where their first kiss happened?
In the front seat of a Honda SUV in a gas station parking lot?
Yeah! Right, mine happened on a bus on the way home from a marching band contest with other students around us, right? These are all kind of places where, like, you could get caught at an age where even if you're going to brag to your friends later, you don't want them to watch you do it, or God forbid, hear you do it, right? So it could be movie theater, our parents' living room, our bedroom with our parents in the other room, right? We're trying to be quiet. And I had never thought about it this way until Reed explained it to me. But when your earliest experiences about something are tied to silence, you carry that with you, right? It's so simple. It's so simple, and I didn't see it, and it's not my fault, right? Or any of our faults, but we have to consciously break it. So the innate impulse to shh any sexual activity also keeps us from saying any words at all. In fact, the thought of saying any word at all during sex is pretty terrifying to most people. Words are a presumed mood killer, or like some sort of deviant act. So the idea of talking during sex to some people sounds more terrifying than like standing up here. I'm about to make it easier for you. Opening up in even small ways can change everything. So here's what sounds like sort of a silly example, but I'm going to use it because it's something even the inexperienced among us can relate to. Boundaries aren't the only things we should be talking about. We should also be talking about needs. So until I started researching it for a set of articles, my ADHD was a big problem in sexual situations, and I was super insecure about it. I present as not paying attention just in conversation, even if I'm super into what you're saying, because I have to play with the spoon in my drink, and I'm like looking at the things behind you. It's a bar, I'm probably checking 19 sports scores, but that doesn't mean I'm not paying attention to you. The problem with translating that into a proverbial bedroom isn't just that you might come across as not into the person you're with, but it can be really hard to get off when you're not in the moment. They call it letting go as a euphemism for a reason. Like, you have to be there and relaxed and into it. So I used to be super insecure about that. God, I hope this isn't a distracted day. What if I have a song stuck in my head? This could be a nightmare. Luckily, my current partner, a boyfriend's sort of the easiest mononormative term, is also ADHD. So I could text him on the way to his house last week and say, hey, you should probably have some music queued up because there's something stuck in my head that's going to be a huge problem. And he did. No problem. He'll occasionally tell me that his ADHD is going to be a thing that could or will likely prevent him from being in the moment. This comes with benefits. Those days are all about me. And just like that, we found a way to take something that used to make us both super insecure and a huge roadblock with previous and current partners into something that's mostly fun and often beneficial. It's a shared need, and we figured it out just by talking to each other about it. And I think it started with an offhanded comment. I was talking about writing the ADD article, and he was like, yeah, sometimes it's a problem for me in the bedroom. And I was like, yeah. That was how the conversation started. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to describe exactly what happens to you to bring it up. And this is something else most of us don't do. As unpracticed as we are at talking about sex while we're having it, as I mentioned, we definitely don't talk about it while we're not having it. Now this is changing a little bit with the advent of sexting. So that's handy, because it at least is introducing the idea at a time where we're not having it. But you can sneak stuff into those conversations that's more real than just like, dude, I had this dream last night and I have to tell you about it, or like, picturing you such and such right now, right? It can also be like explaining to someone what you think about it. They can react to it while you're not in the moment and give you an idea about whether or not they would be into it. They have to so this isn't just about the sort of default standard sex act that we think of that we're taught in original sex ed. This could be as early as like when you're making out with somebody new. Anyone ever feel like the person they're making out with is trying to chew their face off? I promise you, Hannah and I did not talk about our talks before we were here. Yeah, right, at some point, we don't say anything, do we? No, we may be like looking for an escape route or listening for a phantom phone we can tell them we hear to get out of there, but we don't say anything. And it's not just about courtesy, right? If you really like that person, you should be able to talk to them about it. I mean, it could be something as simple as their last partner was into that, for whatever reason. Or they got some bad advice from somebody. That happens a lot, right? Who knows? And you can't know if you don't ask. So I'm going to close with the only straight up advice I'm going to give you.
To 109 West Main Street.
Yeah! Now we all know where we're going. So hopefully this is really just encouraging you to go out and explore. Like I can't give advice on this to a group this size because I don't know what you want. Just want to encourage you to feel more comfortable looking for it. But this is a thing that should work with anyone. If you ever don't know what to say in the moment or any other time, one sentence is always hot and will also get you out of or into anything. Tell me what you want. It works every time. And it gives the other person an automatic out because they can say this or nothing, right? It's not a question that puts them on the spot in the same way. All right, I think we've got a little time for Q&A or shares. So I'm more of a conversation prompter than lecture style expert, so however you guys want to use this like 8 minutes we've got. In your minute.
Okay, so I'll pass the mic around and we'll just do like short, succinct questions or not long stories because there's a lot of you and not a lot of time, so I really appreciate that. Who would like to go first?
It would be interesting if nobody had anything to say at a topic. Why we can't talk.
Why do women never make the first move?
That's actually a really good question. Why do women never make the first move? We're super taught not to. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we as a culture are not supposed to talk about sex in general. And so we're not supposed to be sexualized, period. We're not supposed to enjoy it. That's still happening. It's not an old idea. I am going to overshare. I think just because of my personality, where I tend to move around a lot, and I tend to talk a lot, and I tend to do things, I'm expressive during sex, even when I was bad at talking about it. And the responses I would get a lot of the time were how nice it was to know I was enjoying myself. And I think that part of that is that there have been some really good studies that you can Google because we don't have time. But women of any sexual orientation, this goes across the spectrum, are way more conscious of what they look like. And I don't mean how our hair is, I mean how we're being perceived during a sexual encounter than men. And part of that will translate all the way to the beginning. We're already overthinking it because we're taught that our part is a performance. You guys have to produce, right? You have to make the thing happen, drive the thing, but we're supposed to produce the response, and that's a lot of pressure. And just that amount of pressure makes it hard for us to play the flip side if we've never had that. If you're having that problem with a partner, tell them you would like them to initiate.
Yes, the mic.
Sorry, oh sorry, go ahead.
First, let me apologize for my GPS interrupting without consent.
It's really okay.
I was wondering, when your life to-do list changed, did your list of what you were looking for in a partner change dramatically?
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for you. I have really terrible dating luck until about 6 months ago. So famous, I'm co-writing a series with a friend at the establishment called It's Totally Me. You can check the hashtag and find it at the website. Famously, like, we enlisted professional matchmakers, like, across the country. And she got me on one date, and it's with someone she's known since middle school. So, like, she just was more like being set up with a friend. So I've had part of my issue with talking about this, and I know I'm not the only one because of responses to the series, is that when you don't have a ton of dating experience, it's really hard to know what you want. Sex is the same way. If we're not taught to, or encouraged, or allowed to go explore, how are we ever supposed to figure it out?
My own experience when I was a teenager is that males have no problem talking about the details. This happened, and she did this, but we don't talk about the feelings. And I wondered if it's generally opposite for women.
No, worse. By worse, I mean better. Women tend to be way more detailed, but not with our whole group of people. This is a huge generalization, by the way. But we tend to have what I've always called my tell everything friend. I always had one of those, where she's gonna literally hear from the very beginning, from what he said to me all the way, yeah, I see some nodding. Guys tend to talk more in like bullet points, right? It's why you skip over feelings. It's not because you're not feeling them, you're just very bullet pointy, and we're more chatty. So we're gonna go into a different kind of detail than you guys are.
Well, it just feels wrong to tell your friends how you're feeling about
It does, right? That's a whole other talk, that it feels wrong to tell your friends how you're feeling. That's a real specific issue. But something actually my boyfriend complains about a lot, because my two closest girlfriends are people that I have no problem touching, right? I don't just mean like girls tend to hug each other more, we're huggers. But like if I've had a really bad day, it's as helpful for me to like curl up in my best friend's lap with a smoothie and a shitty movie or whatever like is helpful that day as it is his, right? We're more able to get some of that. It's part of why women do more emotional labor in their in hetero relationships, because for most men, most straight men, the only emotional assist they're getting is from their female partner, which means we have to do all the weight, whereas women have a pie chart, right? We've usually got a sister or a cousin, a best friend, like we have more go-to people. So that's a problem that like transcends just talking about sex. Men aren't encouraged to have those kinds of bonds with each other. You're encouraged to have bros, not best friends. And it's one of the reasons you have trouble talking to partners too. You're just not practiced at it at all. I'm not a sociologist, but I would be interested to find out.
We can take one more.
Are there any women questions? We've got virgins. Yay! Sorry, guys.
Well, thank you.
Be interested to know what you think about the whole number thing. Like, women are only allowed to have X number.
Yeah,
and I was like, huge girl. And I had an experience where I dated someone, and the minute he found out that my number was more than one, he just thought of me as a completely different person.
Right. So I have lots of thoughts, but two very succinct ones. One is that we have a misconception in this, I love puns, in this culture that people who have a lot of sex are riskier to have sex with, right? When risk of getting an STI actually lower among non-monogamous people. We're way more safer sex conscious. We have a lot more rules about barriers and who you're allowed to have sex with. And nowadays also, who we're allowed to have sex with and without protection with. We have phrases like fluid bonded. So if you're in a tight relationship with someone for a long time, we've turned it into a thing. You go get tested together, right? And so and then everyone's stuff is the same, or there's no stuff, whatever. And so you're comfortable with that. So part of it is a real misconception. They're afraid in a real stigmatized way about STIs in general. And part of it is just that they have a lot of performance anxiety. We're told that men are supposed to be not just the aggressors, but the more experienced one. I don't understand how the numbers are supposed to work out on that, right? If only 7 to 8% of the population is gay, and there's 92% of it, how is it that men are supposed to get all this experience if we're all professional virgins over in the corner? I'm not sure how that is. But it's just, it's sticking around, right? It's this problem. We can't talk about it or turn it into a positive. I have found that the guys who are super fixated on your number, they're not worth having sex with.